$40 trillion. That is what the United States government owes as of today, and the Treasury Department confirmed it in its own daily update. We will break down exactly why that number lands on your mortgage payment. Then, a Meta whistleblower takes the stand at a landmark trial and testifies that Mark Zuckerberg lied about caring for child safety. Israel admits its soldiers fired at the car in which Hind Rajab was killed. An Idaho County probation office builds what is being called a foreign-born list and hands it to immigration agents. A defense minister fired by Volodymyr Zelensky goes public and demands wartime elections. And Mike Lindell reaches into his own pocket to recount an election he lost by 11 points. 6 stories, all money and power. Best first. Stay to the end, because the last one tells you exactly how much a grievance costs these days. $40 trillion. Not a forecast, not a projection. That is what the federal government owes right now, according to the Treasury Department's own daily financial update. The debt crossed that line on Wednesday, and it got there just 5 months after passing $39 trillion. Spending is running more than $2 trillion ahead of tax revenue every single year. Margaret Spellings, president of the Bipartisan Policy Center, said the current fiscal trajectory is plainly unsustainable, and that is the best-case scenario. In her words, even in the rosiest scenarios, we are speeding toward a cliff and refusing to turn the wheel. The hole got deeper after the Supreme Court struck down many of Donald Trump's tariffs, forcing the Treasury to refund more than $100 billion in import taxes that had been collected illegally. The White House blames Democrats. Spokesman Kush Desai says the administration is slashing waste, fraud, and abuse while accelerating growth. But revenues have grown 3% this fiscal year while spending grew faster, and the debt-to-GDP ratio has worsened since Trump returned to office. Here is why it hits your wallet. Interest alone now costs more than $1 trillion a year, the government's second biggest expense behind Social Security, and 15% higher than a year ago. The 30-year Treasury yield hit a 19-year high this week, and the average 30-year mortgage neared 6.7%, reported by NPR. A whistleblower has taken the stand and accused the most powerful man in social media of lying. According to The Guardian, a Meta whistleblower testified at a landmark trial that Mark Zuckerberg lied about his concern for child safety. Hold on to 2 words there: testified and alleged. This is sworn testimony from a witness in an ongoing case. It is not a verdict, it is not a finding of fact, and nothing here has been proven against Zuckerberg or against Meta. A court decides what it believes, not a headline. But understand why a case like this gets called landmark. When a child safety claim moves out of a congressional hearing room and into a courtroom, it enters a world of discovery, internal documents, sworn witnesses, and cross-examination. Testimony becomes evidence. Evidence becomes exposure. And for a company that sells attention for a living, exposure gets measured in advertiser confidence, regulatory pressure, and shareholder risk. If you hold a broad index fund in a retirement account, you own a slice of the outcome whether you follow the case or not. If you are a parent, the question is narrower and sharper. What did the company know about how its products affect children? When did it know it? And what did it choose to do about it? That is what this trial exists to answer. Reported by The Guardian. Israel has admitted that its soldiers fired at the car in which Hind Rajab was killed. That admission is reported by The Guardian, and the significance is in the word admits. For a long stretch, responsibility for the shooting of that car was contested. Now, the acknowledgement has come from the Israeli side itself. Separately, the Associated Press reports that the Israeli military has launched criminal probes into the killings of Hind Rajab and of Palestinian paramedics. Let us be precise about what those 2 reports do and do not establish. An admission that soldiers fired is not the same as a finding of unlawful conduct. A criminal probe is not a charge, and a charge is not a conviction. Investigations can end in prosecutions or in nothing at all, and militaries investigating themselves face obvious questions about independence. Why does an incident like this belong in a money and power roundup? Because official acknowledgments change the terrain on which everything else sits. They feed into arms export debates, into court filings in other jurisdictions, into aid conditions, into the political cost that allied governments pay at home for continued support. The next question is whether these probes produce named suspects, findings, and published conclusions, or quietly expire. Reported by The Guardian, with the investigations reported by the Associated Press. A county probation office in Idaho compiled what is described as a foreign-born list and shared it with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That is the Associated Press reporting, and read the words slowly, because the sorting principle is the story. A probation office supervises people already convicted or already under court supervision. Its files are built for one purpose: making sure conditions of release are followed. A foreign-born list does not sort by offense, by risk, or by compliance. It sorts by where a person was born. The AP report we have does not tell us how many names were on that list or who asked for it first. Those are exactly the questions county officials should now be made to answer in public, on the record. Here's what it means for ordinary people. Probation departments run on information that defendants are legally required to hand over. If that information can be repackaged by birthplace and forwarded to federal agents, then everyone in the system learns to say less, and supervision works worse for everybody, citizen or not. Local governments are not moving in one direction on this. The same AP Wire reports that San Diego County will stop letting federal immigration agents train at its local firing ranges. Cooperation is being expanded in one county and withdrawn in another, reported by the Associated Press. A defense minister dismissed by Volodymyr Zelensky is now publicly demanding that Ukraine hold elections. That is the Washington Post reporting, and it is a bigger deal than a personnel dispute. Think about the sequence. A person who sat at the very top of the war effort, who saw the procurement, the manpower numbers, and the battlefield reality from the inside, is removed. And instead of going quietly, he turns around and calls for the country to vote. That is not a policy disagreement. That is a challenge to who holds the mandate to run the war. For Ukraine's allies, this is the sensitive nerve. Western capitals have spent enormous sums on the argument that Kiev is united and that its government speaks for its people. A former defense chief saying the leadership needs to be refreshed at the ballot box hands ammunition to every legislator abroad who wants to slow down the next aid package, and to Moscow's messaging as well. It also raises the practical question nobody has a clean answer to: how a country under invasion, with millions displaced and territory occupied, would run a credible national election at all. Watch for whether other former officials line up behind this call and whether Zelensky answers it directly or lets it burn out. Reported by The Washington Post. MyPillow founder Mike Lindell lost the Republican primary for governor of Minnesota by roughly 11 percentage points, and he is now privately funding a hand recount and audit of that primary out of his own pocket. That is The Hill reporting. In a statement on Wednesday, Lindell cited multiple irregularities that he said his team caught on election night, including what were described as vote totals that moved backwards. Those are his claims. They are allegations, not established findings, and an 11-point margin is not a margin that hand counting typically closes. Now the money angle, because this is where it gets instructive. Recounts and audits are expensive. Staff, counting space, security, lawyers, observers. When a candidate self-funds one, he is buying something a state process would not give him: control of the procedure and control of the narrative that comes out of it. A privately commissioned count carries no legal force. It cannot change a certified result. What it can produce is a document, and documents get quoted long after the arithmetic is forgotten. Watch two things next: whether Minnesota election officials engage with this effort at all, and whether whatever it publishes gets adopted by other losing candidates as a template. Grievance, it turns out, has a price list. Reported by The Hill. Watch two things over the next few days: whether long-term Treasury yields keep climbing and drag mortgage rates up with them, and whether those Israeli criminal probes produce named suspects or quietly fade. Here's my question for you. $40 trillion in debt and more than $1 trillion a year just in interest. Who do you think actually pays that bill in the end? Tell me below. Like the video and subscribe to the Capitol Oversight so the next one finds you.